Okay, so now I'm going to transition. You guys might be aware that normally we do kind of a land acknowledgement to the people from the San Gabrielino
Sorry, Charles.
Valley
Jeannie
tribes.
has her hand up. I think she might have some one update.
We can do updates later. I don't have time to do
Okay.
additional ones now. We have traditionally done a land acknowledgement and so I lost my place on my thing. Just give me a second. We traditionally done a land acknowledgement where we talk about how these lands were originally the property of First Nations peoples, the indigenous people in this region, and just to kind of acknowledge that. Given the recent events in Los Angeles, in addition to acknowledging that, I want to talk about how history is kind of repeating itself in a really gross way. And that's kind of the focus of what we're going to talk about tonight, and how our federal government has turned Los Angeles into an occupied city. We've been invaded by military forces that are throughout our city, though much of it remains in the shadows. And I thought it would be irresponsible for us to actually not talk about this, given we are the Los Angeles chapter. And the ICE raids are things that everybody has seen, and the abuse of people that have happened as a result from what's happened at our federal government are greatly concerning to all of us. And when I'm thinking about doing a land acknowledgement, it's just crazy to think about how we haven't learned lessons from all these years so far back. And then in terms of messaging, the resistance that we have had in this city has been remarkable. Those many of you came out for the No Kings days all over the city. There were protests. We had many thousands of people in Los Angeles who were taking to the streets and talking about it, not just on that day, but on other days, as a result of the ICE raids as well. And the resistance in the form of protests has been twisted into right-wing propaganda, that there are now claims that our city is a war zone and it is complete chaos. And this has been used to justify the oppression being brought into our city in the form of federal troops. Climate Reality Project is nonpartisan. Everybody is welcome here as long as they respect the rights of others. We are not here doing the work of any one political party. But I'll tell you what we're also not doing. We will not be silent while democratic institutions are being dismantled. We will not timidly look for small concessions while our federal government, openly in league with the fossil fuel industry that funds it, undermines any and all progress towards working on the climate crisis. We will not excuse those who use the tools of propaganda to lie to our neighbors, not only about climate, but also to get them to distrust all our institutions in order to look for authoritarian solutions. We will not stand by quietly while peaceful residents of our city are abducted and disappeared using Gestapo tactics. We will not forget history. The United States will always be guilty of a history with bloodshed and deeply racist policies, from our genocide of Native Americans to enslavement of Black people to putting Asian people in wartime prison camps, just to name a few blatant examples. We will not make progress towards a just and sustainable society by tolerating attempts to erase our history to comply with the white supremacist dicta of Project 2025 and our current leadership. And we will never be hesitant to specifically call out fascism by name. Donald Trump and the MAGA cult are, plain and simple, a fascist movement dismantling 250 years of a democracy. That democracy, albeit a deeply imperfect one with a checkered past, has never before faced an internal threat that questions the very goals of a democratic political experiment in favor of an authoritarian regime driven by a cult of personality. You can be sincerely liberal, centrist, or conservative, but none of that matters if you no longer have a political voice. The whole purpose of Climate Reality Project is not just to speak truth to power, but to continue to champion truth in the face of lies. We will not rest, and we will not let this moment in history continue without opposition. So that's something I wanted to share with all of you and let you know that's where we are. And we are doing that work, and we want you to be part of it with us. That being said, tonight's panel discussion is going to be with two wonderful people who are working in areas of advocacy that are completely different. Marissa Roy is a Deputy Attorney General for the state of California. She has a long history of challenging these types of efforts from our federal government at the state level and at the national level, challenging them through litigation, through pushback, and has been heavily involved in resistance, basically in the system. Our other panelist, who I don't see yet tonight, and I'm hoping she will arrive, but if she doesn't, I'm just going to still tell you who she was and why I invited her, is Meredith Aaron. She is the co-founder of a business called Boardwalk LA. They make shirts and games and all kinds of items in a sustainable fashion locally, and they're extremely political. They are basically working outside the system to push back and message things with a healthy dose of humor and fighting the system in a completely different way. So I hope Meredith is able to join us. If we don't get her tonight, we're still extremely lucky to have Marissa here this evening. And so let's just go ahead and start the ball rolling now with Marissa. Thank you so much for being here this evening, Marissa. And Andy, could you spotlight Marissa and myself, please? So while he's doing that, Marissa, welcome. We're really pleased to have you here this evening.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to talk to everyone.
Can you give us just, for those of you who are not as familiar with your career, I gave just an embarrassingly short, overview, basically because I wanted you to be able to kind of offer more of your perspective. Could you talk about the work you do and how you came to that work so we can understand the path that led you there?
Sure. Yeah, as Charles said, and I'm saying this at the front so I can give the disclaimer before I get into all the stories. I am a Deputy Attorney General, but the official title is used for identification purposes only and doesn't imply, and I'm not representing the department or the Attorney General himself, just kind of speaking in my personal capacity. Long before I was ever an attorney, I was a very protective older sister to a gay younger brother. I grew up in Monrovia, so right kind of near the edges of LA County, and I was always having to defend him from bullies who would say he's not a normal boy. And then Prop 8 passed, and right around the time he is starting to learn his identity and think about who he is, he's seeing our state vote against his future and vote to take away his civil rights. It was the San Francisco city attorney that sued and got that law overturned. And that was the inspiration for me to become a lawyer. And so I ended up going to Yale because they had a clinic with San Francisco. And that is where I learned the power of litigation and the power of litigation brought by local governments. So San Francisco, like Los Angeles, any city in California over 750,000 can sue any business for anything unlawful, unfair, or deceptive. And San Francisco, being San Francisco, they have fun. And they sue big tech, they sue for-profit universities, they sue for wage theft and for tenants' rights. And they have a really interesting relationship with this law school clinic where you have law students working about 20 hours a week, and they have law students come up with some of the ideas for the lawsuits because law students are creative and don't necessarily know the limits yet. And so one lawsuit I worked on when I was at Yale and kind of was helping to build and pitch was the lawsuit where San Francisco sued oil companies, BP and others, basically trying to recover for how all of the misleading information about climate change and all of their continuation of these efforts to increase oil production and increase and contribute to pollution, how it had impacted the city of San Francisco. We were trying to recover for all of that and argue that it was a public nuisance. And it was the first lawsuit of this kind. And a lot of people thought it was crazy. But San Francisco tried it and took it on, and it actually proceeded way past where people expected it to go and ended up in a settlement. And so that was the first major victory that has actually inspired so many lawsuits like it and the make polluters pay movement, which also, if there's a bit of inspiration I can offer, is that litigation is a path to do this where we don't necessarily need legislation. I will say litigation takes longer and it's a headache, but we still have many avenues, and I'm happy to talk about that more in Q&A. But anyway, after that experience, I went to work at the LA City Attorney's Office, where Mike Fewer was trying to build out this similar impact litigation work. And so I worked at the City Attorney's Office, where I did workers' rights, fought misclassification and wage theft. And the Trump administration was starting to rise. And the LA County Council's office hired O'Melveny O'Melveny and Myers, a big law firm in LA, to do their anti-Trump litigation. So I actually went to work at O'Melveny because they needed a municipal attorney to kind of work on that team. And I was part of over a dozen legal actions against the Trump administration. So developed a very unique expertise that I had hoped I would never have to use again. That unfortunately, that is not the case. And after the Trump administration, I went to a nonprofit that represents cities all over the country doing civil rights litigation. I represented cities in Florida suing Ron DeSantis, and we won. I represented Houston against Greg Abbott, represented cities and counties in Arizona and Michigan after Roe had fallen, and we needed to challenge the pre-Roe abortion bans that had come back into effect. So I've had the opportunity to do and then now, of course, I'm at the Attorney General's office doing consumer protection and investigating violations of housing law. So I've had this opportunity to touch many different areas of law, ranging from climate litigation to tenants' rights to suing the Trump administration. But I think the through line and sort of what motivates me and why law is really the vehicle I chose is because for me, when I see the people of the state of California on that, header to the lawsuit, it's personal. There's a family behind there, and I was that family once. And so I never really forget that when we're thinking about government litigation, it shouldn't be divorced from the people that it's serving.
Thank you. That's a lovely overview. I appreciate it. First question I want to throw your way is really about the loss of confidence in our institutions. And with respect to the legal world, my personal perspective is that over the last 2 decades, we've seen increasing loss of objectivity from our courts, especially at the Supreme Court level.
Yeah.
We now have an active Supreme Court and use of the Trump administration, where the shadow docket is being used to just create tremendous abuses to a system. It was not intended to work that way at all. I'll ask you to explain that, what it is, because you're a better legal expert than I am, obviously. But my question, in addition to that, is how do we talk to people in the street to convince them that we need to depend on even the good actors like the Marissa Roys out there and the people who are doing work to fight back, when so many of the levers of institutional control now within the legal system, within the third branch of government, are controlled by partisan people acting in a partisan fashion to support the dismantling of those protections?
I mean, I think my big message to people is that is exactly how they want us to feel. They want us to give up, because that moment when we give up in our institutions is the moment that they truly own them. I can't deny, and I won't, that Trump is crippling our institutions. And long before Trump, the Federalist Society has been weakening our court system and politicizing and grooming these hyper partisan judges to be appointed. And so this has been in the works as an organizing process for 50 years at this point, and we're starting to really see the results of that long-term game. But the reason I haven't given up on the courts is I still think in many ways it is our best tool and our best check to fight back, even when it is hobbled. We've seen, I think, about 200 lawsuits in this administration, which is insane. I don't think this volume is sort of unprecedented. The AG's office is suing more than once a week. But we've seen about 160 preliminary injunctions or temporary restraining orders pausing different parts of Trump's agenda. And often the thing is, Trump does these things that are so blatantly unconstitutional that when they're called out and sued and you get the injunction, often he just moves on to the next thing. So we are still using the courts to catch quite a bit, and that's not insignificant. And with regard to the Supreme Court is at this moment absolutely a lost cause. But it would be even more lost if we don't keep trying to invest in flipping the Senate so that the next judicial appointments are going to help rebalance the court, or we finally had a Congress that's ready to do court expansion. I will say, though, one thing that Judge Reinhardt, who was known as the liberal lion judge on the Ninth Circuit, he passed away a few years ago, he always used to be fond of saying, they can't catch them all. The Ninth Circuit has about 10,000 cases, and the Supreme Court has a docket of like around 80 to 90 a year. And yes, there is this, as we call it, the shadow docket, which is where the judges can reject challenges for review in unsigned opinions, things like that. But still, there is such a volume of litigation that happens at the lower levels that the Supreme Court can do true damage. And certainly with, I think, the nationwide injunction order that just came down on Friday, that is going to be significant damage. But on the other hand, and I'll maybe explain that quickly for those of you who didn't. Basically, the Supreme Court, we sued a bunch of states, and also private plaintiffs sued about Trump's birthright citizenship order. And a judge issued a nationwide injunction because you'd think if something's unconstitutional, it shouldn't apply anywhere, right? Supreme Court disagreed, and they said that the injunction, nationwide injunctions, are disfavored, and that this injunction was going to go back to the district courts so that it would only apply in the states essentially where it was brought. So I think it was maybe 19 or 22 states. So we're going to have an uneven patchwork of where constitutional rights apply. But the ACLU was prepared for that and filed a 50-state class action. And so this is one of those things where, as much as the Supreme Court is a hindrance, we also are very prepared and need to continue to outfox them. It's going to be a harder battle for sure, and there will be more losses this time. I think, in the first Trump administration, we were so used to kind of winning in the Ninth Circuit and winning in the district courts. There will be some losses this time, but there's still a significant amount of wins. And if we stop investing in our courts, in our institutions, we make the wins even bigger, and we make the descent into authoritarianism easier. And so I think my message this time, in the first administration, it was, we have these great checks and, choose hope, all of that. I think this is a grittier version of hope this time. This is the hope that is a little bit beat up. But it is also our only choice. Otherwise, we capitulate. I don't know if that was very inspiring.
Well, no, it was a good explanation of why, it's yeah, it sucks, but if we don't keep working on it, it's only going to get worse. I mean, kind of basically, right? So
Essentially.
yeah. So turning to a more local front, anybody who read your description on our website, your bio on our website, knows that you have declared yourself a candidate for city attorney in Los Angeles, and certainly want to give you an opportunity to speak to that at some point during this conversation. But more importantly, for our purposes, do we have avenues within the legal system on a local and state level that can set up buffers to some of these things that are happening? And especially with respect to the environment and climate, we have an active effort right now to remove the CAFE standards. We have active effort now to basically remove all the extra things that California has done to protect the environment and incentivize moving along sustainability and climate goals. Certainly there's a legislative role there to play. Can you talk about maybe the legal role in terms of fighting these fights?
Yeah, absolutely. So obviously the legislative role is really important because where the federal government might preempt some actions, there's still a lot of gaps that California can fill. And the nice thing in a weird way is Congress is so inefficient that it's very hard for them to come up with new legislation to preempt us. So we are able to still fill in a lot of gaps. Whenever the state fills in a gap and has a regulation, at the city level, we're actually able to enforce it through what's called the unfair competition law. So in California, all cities over, as I mentioned, 750,000 can sue against anything unlawful, unfair, or deceptive. And unlawful means anything, violation of federal law, state law, local law. It's a really expansive power that actually falls to the LA City Attorney's Office. And so we can really fill the gaps by enforcing state climate laws on a local level, as well as bring public nuisance lawsuits, which are really creative ways to also address There's so much in LA, like toxic dumping is an issue that you see a lot of, like corporate pollution, particularly in lower income neighborhoods, which leads to both kind of like a crisis of like climate inequity too. And that's something where by focusing on corporate pollution, by bringing more of these public nuisance lawsuits, bringing more consumer protection lawsuits, we can really address sort of the impacts of climate change that people are feeling. And that's a lot of the litigation that I would really like to ramp up at the city attorney's office, is making sure that we are doing a very diligent job focusing on the impacts of how, corporations have polluted our ecosystems at the very, very local level. Because, the thing is, the state has litigation, a recent litigation actually suing like oil companies for misleading information about plastics. And now I think LA County also sued Coca-Cola because the state sued the oil companies about how they misled the state about how actually recycling was much more effective than it was, and then it led to overconsumption of plastics, and it's leading to our microplastics issues. We've had LA County sue PepsiCo and Coca-Cola, making the same theories about how they were perpetuating use of plastics because of the exaggeration and deception around recycling. There's stuff that we can do at that local level. We can be doing lawsuits just like LA County is doing. And then we can also be focusing on some of these neighborhood by neighborhood issues, because sometimes the way it works is that the Attorney General focuses on things that have a statewide focus, as they should. But it can miss that we're the largest city in California. And so everything that happens also within our city is really important to make sure that we are enforcing as well. And so doing a lot of this impact litigation and public nuisance litigation is really key.
And in a capacity as city attorney, would those kind of things be at your discretion, or do they still require approval of city council? How does that work in terms of the ability to exercise those kind of initiatives?
Yeah, the consumer protection questions are actually, that's in the name of the people. So it is within the city attorney's discretion. And so I think when we look at, there's kind of a difference when we have the hat on of we're representing the city, especially when we're in a defensive posture. The city's our client. We need to go through all of the legal and ethical requirements in terms of consulting with our client, getting their approval on settlements and decisions like that. But when you have the people hat on, which is the hat I've always worn when I was at the city attorney's office and now at the attorney general's office, you are representing sort of the general public interest. And there is a lot of discretion and a lot of potential, which is why you've seen cities like San Francisco and San Diego really grow this type of litigation and think very creatively of what we can do to serve the public at large.
That makes sense. What would be your take on the role for organizations like Climate Reality Project Los Angeles on trying to get those things in the system to work? We're already very active in advocating on legislation, both at the local level and at the state level. So we have a number of extremely talented people who devote tremendous amounts of time to stay up on what's going on, and we take positions, we write letters, we have meetings. We're doing that kind of stuff. Is there a lane that we're missing? Is there a way that we can, as stakeholders, reinforce good actors and good actions beyond what we're doing that comes to mind?
I think, and I, of course, am going to be a little bit, biased thinking about my lane. But I have always built my lawsuits with community input. And I think it's really, really important because when I build like a workers' rights lawsuit, it's always been important for me to be in conversation with the union representing the workers or the Workers' Rights Center for a couple of reasons. One, they've already done so much more research and investigation on this issue and are able to give us documents that just like really like jumpstart our investigation. And then two, their perspective is so important in the settlement to make sure that we aren't missing something. Sometimes it's not for any ill intent, just sometimes we don't know what's on the ground as attorneys. We're really great at researching things on Westlaw and like taking a set of facts and issue spotting and then making it into a beautiful lawsuit and argument. But community is what brings kind of the facts and the real life impacts to the table. And so I think one thing I would really like to see with the city attorney's office is for it to be more accessible to groups and more accessible to the people so that people are bringing lawsuits to the city attorney's office. People are bringing what they are observing in terms of violations and nuisances and all of this research that you are all the experts on so that we can help build cases. And I think it's also would be helpful when we think about, adding new legislation, thinking about it with the idea of like, oh, these are some gaps. We haven't been able to bring this lawsuit because we don't have this type of legal hook. We don't have this type of liability. It would be helpful, I think, for us to be in conversation, thinking about how when we're, drafting legislation, what would be the best ways also? What are the enforcement mechanisms we're putting in there so that we can craft the best cases? Because, I think one thing I see a lot is we pass sometimes some really good laws. This happens in the tenant space quite a bit, where we pass really great tenant protections. And then like the tenant anti-harassment ordinance is a great example. We passed it 2 years ago. It's actually very robust. There have been 13,000 complaints so far, but 0 city attorney cases. And that's actually more of a discretionary choice, but we also didn't build in a private right of action, which means that when the city attorney is choosing not to bring any of these cases, there's not really a way for, private attorneys to help get these cases. And we didn't put in attorney's fees to incentivize the private bar. And so thinking about that, where I would really love the city attorney's office to be more invested, bringing the litigation hat, of how we can make sure that we're building in things to the causes of action when we're developing legislation, and then also inviting community groups to be able to have a relationship with us and give us input, so that we are able to jumpstart our cases and build cases that reflect the needs on the ground, especially with regard to climate expertise.
That's a good answer, but let me offer you kind of a flip side of that from a standpoint of somebody who works as an advocate with my time, and the people in this room. Our organization was a founding member of the coalition called the SoCal Stop Artificial Turf Task Force, which is a mouthful, and I am to blame for that long name. I will own it. But we now have like 60 different environmental and stakeholder groups throughout the region who are part of that. And despite the fact that we have experts in science, in understanding this, in areas of landscaping, alternative to our artificial turf, pretty much every objection you could come up with, we have brought in experts as part of that coalition, and we've done a lot of work. A lot of tremendous people have done a tremendous amount of work on it. That being said, and this is common on nearly everything we do as an organization, when there is a profit motive on the other side, we are outgunned. Every time we show up somewhere, there are 3 times as many paid representatives there from the Synthetic Turf Council, which is fossil fuel interests from all artificial turf comes from fracked methane. And just giving you this really specific example, they show up in force and have abundant propaganda and access to our politicians. And I'm not saying we're going to give up on that particular fight or that we're going to lose it even, because I think history's on our side on it. But it is a real challenge for advocates when there is a profit motive that is treated as an equally sincere source that you're constantly confronting, who has more resources, more time, and less adherence to reality and the truth, because there's a profit motive paying for them to distort reality. And I'm curious, you as somebody who is probably often put in a position of being lobbied to by both sides of that equation, how do you look at that, and what do you advise advocacy groups who face volunteers versus a bunch of paid sources? And I'm sure you encountered that on the work with oil companies, a lot of the stuff that you referenced before.
It's funny, we actually didn't. I think like the interesting thing about being in the lawyer position is you can't really, you can't unless you want to get disbarred. Like we're on the side of the law. And at the end of the day, with the oil companies, we were trying to recover for the impacts they had on San Francisco's rising sea levels. And that is something where we're not going to listen or lobby the oil companies. We're going to investigate them. And they'll sit and they'll give responses, but they have to produce the documents, and we look at the documents. And I think that's the kind of same way of the same way advocacy groups, when I've worked with them, they're not lobbying us. They're usually producing documents. And helping us understand, helping us connect with workers to do interviews about how they're impacted, helping us understand an issue. But at the end of the day, the thing about attorneys is, you're never lobbying an attorney because our loyalty is to the law. We're trying to kind of remedy the issue and see the legal violation. So it doesn't matter how much an oil company will try to lobby. You can't throw money at a lawyer unless you're trying to settle a case and settle for a big amount. But you,
Well, a lot to push back on that, Marissa, a lot of our politicians have law degrees.
I think I think I mean in the lawyer capacity of like
Okay,
when we're investigating a case. I think that when it comes to kind of the legislative, I think we also need to be like really I mean, this is kind of pivoting off my kind of lawyer role and
sure,
thinking
sure,
just, I do a lot of volunteering in politics. This is why it's so important to hold candidates accountable to being grassroots, being corporate free, looking at where the money is coming from and making sure, because I think we've had incredible grassroots wins in Los Angeles of candidates getting outspent like 9-1 and overcoming through a lot of the information networks and a lot of the grassroots like door knocking that we've seen at that level. So I guess I was thinking in the lawyer aspect of like we don't really get lobbied. We just investigate and subpoena and like to collect
sure.
documents. But I think thinking with like the political, if we're talking about the political, I think that the key is that we are seeing the value of grassroots dollars and organizing beating out bigger money. And I think we are starting to see flipping and of different positions at certainly at the city council, the legislature. I think there's been a little less focus, and we need to maybe take some of those lessons we've learned at the local level and apply them to our legislative elections. Because I think I've seen so many good wins at the local level and so much progress in terms of like moving our council to make sure they're affirming that they're not taking oil money and stuff like that. I don't see that as often as this at the state because I don't think we have the same scrutiny and there are so many state electeds that it can sometimes be hard for people to focus. But I think we should take the lessons that we've learned at the local level and apply them to state elections too and state elected accountability.
Okay, I mean, I buy that as a response. Since we have more time here than I anticipated because our other guest was unable to make it, and I hope she's okay. Um, I want to give you an opportunity in one question to tell us why you should be our next city attorney. You've already talked about some of the litigation that you would pursue and some of those things along those lines. But I'm softball questioning this one, throwing it up at you.
Sure.
Yeah,
Yeah, and happy to kind of like take more specific questions on this
sure.
too, because the city attorney does quite a lot. But essentially, the reason I'm running is because this is a moment where we need a city attorney's office that is going to be at the forefront of the fights we're facing. The reality is the city attorney's office could and should be doing a lot more than it is for Angelenos. We are seeing our city literally occupied right now. And the city attorney, the Los Angeles city attorney, has declined to join as a party any lawsuit against the Trump administration. So the birthright citizenship case that was brought by states in the city of San Francisco didn't join that, didn't even join the amicus brief that, over 100 cities, including New York and Boston and others joined. City attorney didn't join the sanctuary cities lawsuit, which I should explain. Trump issued an order that would essentially explore pulling federal funding from sanctuary cities. This is all of our federal funding at risk. So wildfire recovery, public safety, parks, well, you name it. Anything we get from the federal government could be impacted. And because of the sort of reticence and the scrutiny on nationwide injunctions, same judge from the last time when I was involved in that first lawsuit, last time he gave an order striking that as unconstitutional, but it applied a nationwide injunction. So it was fine that LA wasn't on that case. This time, the injunction only protects the cities that brought the case. So San Francisco, Santa Clara, Sacramento, Monterey, San Diego, a bunch of others. LA didn't join. So we're not protected from that order. And then with regard to the federalization of the National Guard, thank God the state jumped in and is leading that lawsuit, but the city should have been a party to that lawsuit. And the city attorney, like on the day of the hearing, filed like a little amicus brief. But an amicus brief doesn't contribute to it's not, a brief on the merits that contributes to the legal arguments. Like it's not building the factual record like a declaration would. It's a discretionary sort of Me Too brief that sometimes judges don't even read. And so we could be doing a lot more. And the city council even just had to file a motion asking the city attorney to look into how we could be challenging ICE's unconstitutional practices. So I just look at this moment in particular as one where we need a city attorney who is going to be courageous and challenge the Trump administration. But then on the local level, there's just also so much of a gap that the city attorney's office could be filling. We have $2.5 billion stolen from workers every year in wage theft, and we've only brought a couple cases in the last couple of years. I mentioned we have 13,000 complaints of tenant harassment and 0 city attorney cases brought. We think about corporate pollution cases. A lot of our environmental litigation has been focused on fisheries, not so much of toxic chemical dumpings. And we haven't been joining lawsuits like the one against PepsiCo and Coca-Cola with the plastics. We could be doing so much more public interest litigation. And I really think that is a huge reason that I am running, is because the potential of the city attorney's office to work on for the people is truly so broad, and we are just not using it. And this is a moment where we need to be using it.
Love everything I'm hearing from my own particular take on these things, but I want to push back and ask,
Yeah.
at a time when we kind of have a centrist mayor, at least as I see things, who has not been leading a charge on climate issues or on a lot of the issues that are important and related to climate, is that going to create, doing the kind of things you're talking about, would those create conflict with between the mayor's office and the city attorney's office? And is that something that is good for the city government ultimately?
Yeah, I mean, I think they are kind of separate things. I mean, the city attorney's office I mentioned is working on behalf of the people in those cases. So not necessarily the city, where a city attorney is giving advice to the mayor, and the mayor is acting in that client role. Of course, the city attorney is deferring and follow the direction of her client. And I always would respect the client first. I think when you have the people hat on, you are representing the people. And in that capacity, it's actually pretty separate from the mayor. And so I think one thing to also kind of keep in mind with all the litigation that I've ever brought, it comes after a pretty deep investigation. And so we build a really, really strong factual case. These are not just kind of like lawsuits we're throwing at the wall. I think the San Francisco the climate complaint was like 50 pages or so. And a lot of my cases have had complaints sometimes up to 200 pages. So we make sure we really do the work to build the factual record, so we're not going out on a limb. And I think that is something that also kind of helps back us up. And also we're not acting in an unprecedented way. I think when I talk about what we could be doing at the LA City Attorney's Office, I'm always pointing to examples from San Francisco or Santa Clara, or even the Orange County DA does really great wage theft work of all places, and San Diego. So it's not like LA is ever going out on a limb. We're just starting to meet the standard of the other peer cities that really use their city attorney's office for the public good.
So tell me this, and I always end my interview portion with this question. I told you you're going to receive it ahead of time when we talked. Getting back to the larger kind of purpose of this event tonight, and the focus of how we live in this time where just every day it's more and more bad news. You've worked as an advocate, you've worked as a champion of rights, and you've worked vigorously on things that you've been passionate about. And just from a personal standpoint, is something we share with our members here when we talk about it, because we need these stories. When you've just gone through something where things just aren't working, whatever you're working on, and you've devoted huge amounts of time and effort, it's not moving forward, you feel like you're banging your head against the concrete wall, what do you personally do? How do you personally regroup, and how do you find a way to get back up and keep the fight going?
I mean, the first answer is carbonara. It's just very simple. I will get the real substantive answer in a sec, but it was just funny because you asked this question. I was thinking, because I literally had one of these moments a week or so when the Ninth Circuit, you know, when I watched the Ninth Circuit argument for the Newsom case, I just immediately knew how it was going to go and walked a block over. I'm in downtown to the downtown cheese shop, and the store owner knows me very well and saw my face and was just like, "You're making carbonara tonight." And so I've perfected carbonara if you ever want any of my tips. Moving beyond the food indulgence. I think for me, there is this book that Rebecca Solnit wrote, Hope in the Dark, where she really wrote about hope in a different way than I think I had ever thought of it before. In terms of, I think sometimes we think about hope as something that is naive or for children or for people who haven't had enough life experience. Um, and hope's a choice. Hope is a choice when you've been beaten down. Hope's gritty. Hope is one of the strongest decisions you can make, is to get back up. And so I think that for me, I think about that book, and then the other book that I think of often, especially lately, is Albert Camus' Myth of Sisyphus. Of essentially, he took the sort of Greek myth of Sisyphus, where the man was punished by rolling a rock up a hill, only to have it go down. And his thesis was you have to imagine Sisyphus is happy. You have to take enjoyment in the work and the toil. You have to choose hope. You have to keep choosing to roll that rock. Um, because kind of otherwise, what are you doing? And I think that I realized I kind of said something similar at the beginning, and it doesn't sound as much like a motivating message, but I think it is the choice and the strength that we have to all lean into. I think the strongest decision we can make right now is hope, is to keep persevering, is to invest even more in our local elections, so that we have as much of a buffer. Because, there's a reason California and Los Angeles is being targeted. It's because if we crumble, all is lost. And the fact that we have, fought when we actually have like we have less strong tools, and we have disadvantages, like the fact that we're still protesting, the fact that we're still distributing know your rights info. I think one of the things is that sometimes we focus, of course, on the losses, and there's no way to measure what would have been had we not been fighting. And that's always like that's some piece of data we can't really quantify. But we know from DHS's internal memos that all the know your rights work has hampered their work. We know that when we are protesting, we are getting in the way. When we're shining a light on things, Trump's public favorability is dropping. We know that if in the courts, maybe we're not getting 100% anymore, but if we're getting 60%, it's 60%. And so we don't want to cede anything. And I think like that's what keeps me going, is I have those moments where like, yes, I need my carbonara, I need my evening. But then I'm always going to keep choosing hope.
Well, despite your diminishing it, I thought that was a very poetic answer. And I want to just say thank you very much for being here. We greatly appreciate it. We're going to open it up now to the larger group of participants and attendees this evening and get questions from other people. I do appreciate, Andy, could you move us back to the group view? I do appreciate that.
There are 2 questions in the chat, by the way.
I do appreciate, I was going to say that there have been several questions put up in the chat. I would ask you, if you have done those questions, if you offered those questions, go ahead and raise your hand. Let's actually add it to the recording, and I will call on Peter and Dave first if they want to raise their hand, so we can actually have that part of that discussion. But just go ahead and raise your hand if you're interested in questions for Marissa, and we'll start with, can you take it to the full group?
Sorry.
Oh, that's cool. Hey, if I was paying you, I'd expect much better results.
Well, you're not.
Well, exactly. So there you go. Pete, why don't you go ahead and give us our first question from Marissa? Pete, you're muted.
He's not.
Oh, he's not muted, right? It doesn't say he's muted. He's just very, very quiet. All right, we're going to jump to Dave and we'll come back to you, Pete, okay? Dave, go ahead.
Okay, can you hear me?
We can.
Okay, yeah, my question is, what can be done about these, according to social media, the bounty hunters who are masked and not identifying themselves. And it seems to be picking up people just by racial profiling, which without having a justification, a crime or anything. Is there anything that can be done at the state or city level to force them to identify themselves and to identify a crime before they grab people off the streets?
Yeah, so there is a bill right now in Sacramento. I think Sasha Renee Perez and Scott Wiener are the authors to ban masked law enforcement. And so that would be a huge help. But I think honestly, even without that bill, it is a federal crime to impersonate a peace officer. And it's also a state crime and therefore local as well. And so I think we need to be actively investigating that and making sure we're responding so that we are, frankly, like these are so many violations of law, like kidnapping violation, like assault, and in a lot of situations, impersonating a law officer. That should be something that we as the city are responding to as a crime, because it is one. And I think that the state law also will help in terms of these masked law enforcement tactics. So there's that, and that effort we should definitely prioritize and support. But I think also at the local level, we should be addressing all of the crimes that are being committed, including the impersonation of peace officers.
Pete, are you good to go, or would you like me to read your question? Go number 2 if you want me to read the question. Okay, we're not hearing you, so I'm going to read it, buddy. Love your solar panels, by the way. So Pete asks, Marissa, could Los Angeles lead a lawsuit as impactful as the one that reached a major settlement with Big Tobacco?
Yeah, the funny thing about that, I was so happy to see that question. There's so much sort of institutional memory that gets lost, but Jim Hahn and Bert Pines actually brought, this was like 70s, 80s, were the big tobacco litigation. LA was a huge player in the big tobacco litigation. And so that's the thing. It's like the city attorney's office, the tradition of this office where we could be the largest public interest law office in the city. Like we have been that before. We were really active in that litigation, and I would really love us to be active in kind of this groundbreaking litigation again. So yeah, it's funny that you mentioned big tobacco because that was one where LA was pretty critical.
Elise.
Hi, what recourse do we actually have when court orders are ignored?
I mean, the recourse we have is getting sanctions, getting contempt. I will say that the the Trump administration is stretching how frankly, like the strength of our courts. And that's one where, yes, there are legal tools when someone doesn't obey an order, it's sanctions, it's contempt. It can be civil or even criminal contempt and fines. But if the Trump administration is going to push our courts to the limit. And so I want to acknowledge that. I want to say that I can give like the legal answer and like here are the tools, but I want to also acknowledge the reality that kind of like Andrew Jackson did with the Trail of Tears. Like we do have a president who is giving the middle finger to our court system. Wow, that's really blunt for me to, I suppose, say on a recorded Zoom, but I think it's one of those things where there is an answer and there are recourses and we should try to pursue them. And I also want to acknowledge the president we have too. I think that what we have seen, there's kind of a very small cadre that does Trump litigation, and we all kind of like chat and end up running into each other in different places. And I heard it described as strategic disobedience, where in this lawyer's perspective, they were mostly seeing compliance with the court orders. And I thought that was an interesting way to phrase it. I think like my kind of hope spin is that we have still seen a lot like significant, Trump abandoning certain efforts because we've won injunctions. So we have still scored major victories, but it is different from the first administration when an order was an order. That is changing. I don't know how far it will go, but I think that we need to pursue every single means to make sure that we are getting those orders enforced and keep filing lawsuits. And I think I just, yeah, want to acknowledge the reality too.
And to follow up on that, we also have a catch-22 at the legal level when the Supreme Court basically said anything you do as president, you can't be doing anything illegal. And so sanctions and contempt charges are meaningless if they're done by our president, apparently now. So are there ways that you as a city attorney or in your work with the state can, with that catch-22 in mind, are there ways to be creative legally to avoid getting caught in that trap?
Yeah, I mean, I think that we can always still do contempt of departments, because remember, there are also the enforcing departments that have to carry out. And so there are ways that we can sort of maneuver around that. There are also just like filing additional new lawsuits and kind of bogging them down in litigation just as much as they're trying to bog us down. One of the strategies I think of the Trump administration is that they really try to distract us to make us lose hope. The goal is for us to get tired and give up. And I think there is a benefit in terms of litigation of it's a tactic for us to also be on the offensive and use those same sort of exhaustion tactics of like keep suing, keep doing new lawsuits, keep exhausting their Department of Justice too.
Andy, you had your hand up, said that, well, you wrote in the chat room that you have your hand up.
Well, because
So-
as host, I can't raise my hand.
Oh, okay, I didn't realize that.
Yes, it's true. It happens.
You could have just
But-
held it up.
Well, okay, I was gonna.
Go ahead, buddy, you're up.
Thank you, Marissa, for your time. I'm going to acknowledge all of these are very important and democracy is under threat. I'm on recording saying that, but I do want to focus on sustainability and climate change. There have been laws that we've supported, such as the right to clean air, clean water, all of that, which is under attack by the current administration. Given that, what can the attorney do, the Los Angeles attorney do to enforce those kinds of rights? And what would you do? And the reason I'm asking that is, as the water committee chair, when we've spoken to elected officials, they've often told us that's a thorny issue. They're not really able to or invested in facilitating sustainable water infrastructure. It's just too thorny. What is a legal way to pursue that, if I could ask that?
Yeah, I'll give you an example with kind of like a San Francisco lawsuit. So similarly, we couldn't there was like legislative issues in terms of the remediation of lead paint. And this is like a very old case. And so I think it was San Francisco and Santa Clara, maybe Oakland as well, filed a lawsuit. Basically, the one of the hooks I mentioned with the unfair competition law is like an unlawful, unfair, deceptive. So you're looking at like is there an unlawful hook? But if there isn't a state statute because of the legislative thorny issues, it doesn't mean you're completely done. Deception's always a good one. And that's why you'll see a lot of the cases are kind of brought in the posture of like the oil companies lied to us because we don't have a make polluters pay law. But deception doesn't need kind of like an existing like state statute as the hook. We can argue deception in terms of they published deceptive information about the efficacy of recycling, and that led to all of these microplastic harms. With the lead paint, yes, there wasn't necessarily a statutory hook, but public nuisance is you can hold a corporation accountable for anything that creates a risk to public health or safety. And that was the theory, actually the theory also for the oil case in San Francisco, but that was the theory for the lead paint case. And so it's common law. It's just one of these concepts that exists and you don't need prior legislation. So when I talk about kind of going after corporate pollution, the way I think about it actually is much more in the public nuisance context, not necessarily always in terms of code enforcement or enforcing state or local law, because I think the public nuisance route is looking at, these chemicals were dumped and now children are experiencing, headaches or asthma at higher rates. That's the public's health and safety risk, and that's the kind of factual record you build for those cases. And so I think public nuisance is really the way to kind of use litigation to plug in when we don't have the adequate kind of existing and specific statutory infrastructure.
Thank you.
Kate, you're up.
Thank you. I was along the same lines, some successful climate cases have been brought by young people. And there was an interesting case, I think, in the international court system where a group of elderly women or older women in Switzerland sued because they were going to be experiencing more severely the effects of heat, the increasing heat. Is there a way to, or how can I stay up to date on what climate cases there are, especially being brought by California? And what is the best way to just stay informed about the things that are being brought in, and to show support if that's at all possible?
Yeah, I think the best way to stay informed, there's not really like, if you would ask me for like a Trump litigation tracker, there are like groups that like track all of the litigation, like Just Security and stuff like that. I'm not actually aware of like a sort of nonprofit or group that tracks all of the climate litigation. I think the um the sort of answer to track all of it would get on a bunch of listservs, which I'm not sure I would wish on anyone, to be on the listservs of every like attorney general and some of the major cities. But I think the cities that I've seen, I think the cases that we know that are really important that are pending right now, are the plastics litigation from the Attorney General's office, and then the plastics litigation in LA County. And probably the best ways to follow that litigation is to try to subscribe to the Attorney General's news updates, as well as I'm not sure if County Council puts them up, but I think that's actually like a resource we really need, to be frank.
Before I do second questions, is there anybody else who who hasn't asked a question yet who would like to jump in? Okay, Elise, it's all yours.
Why, thank you. What is happening with California clean air standards and automotive emissions and our loss of control over them?
I mean, I think the reality is that like the federal government can preempt us. I think that there are going to be, I hope, creative ways we sort of get around, like we are able to like enforce standards in different ways to hold car manufacturers accountable. Like I mean, thinking kind of in the same vein I was just talking about, is sometimes if we don't have a route in terms of the kind of statutory hook and the admission standards, I think we could do a lawsuit about how higher emissions and car manufacturers are harming public health and safety. That would be something we could investigate and explore as well. So I think that um, if I'm being honest, like the preemption power of the federal government is real, and we're going to have to get more creative about how we're holding car companies accountable. It doesn't mean we stop trying, but we do have a tool that is taken away from us. And I'm sorry, it's not a satisfying answer.
I appreciate the insight.
And that's always something to remember when we're talking about climate is, our biggest emission sources in California remain, even with the progress we've made in moving to more sustainable vehicles and some with faster than the rest of the nation. The biggest sources remain transportation sector and the building sector. So those are things that I think there are real legal opportunities to engage on, whether it be electrification or things along those lines. What are your thoughts on that?
Sorry, I also should mention the state has sued, so we'll be litigating that in court. I should have started with that. We've sued. We will continue. We will be litigating. It's not one of the cases I'm on and could speak to in great depth, but if the worst happens, we'll find another avenue. I think that's kind of that's the fun thing about law, is that I truly do believe there's always another avenue.
Okay, last chance for any questions for Marissa. Marissa, thank you so much for being here today. Just for people who aren't aware, the election date that is for the city attorney is still quite a ways away, but could you tell us when that is?
It's next June.
Next June, so a full year away. And we wish you good luck with that. And we appreciate you being here this evening and appreciate your work regardless of elections and all of that. And encourage you and hope that you will continue to not only being involved in all the good work you're doing, but also consider yourself part of our family now and always welcome here to engage with us and what we're doing, and reach out to us when we can be of help to things that support the causes that you're involved in, because that's why we're here. So we don't have to worry about saying middle finger on camera. We can go full strength and say it because we're not running for anything. So thank you very much, everyone. Yeah, I see James. Thank you for the applause. And we're going to wrap up here in about 13, 14 minutes, but you're welcome to stay.